Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Chai with Maanya. Welcome back to my third ever video. I just want to say thank you so much for all the love you've been giving me. Well, all the love and support you've been giving me for the first two videos. I'm not going to take too much time and I'm going to get right away into this on to the topic of today's video, which is Never Have I Ever. Never Have I Ever is a TV show that I've been wanting to talk about for a while. Not only before I started this YouTube channel, not only after I started this channel, but even before. I remember when I first watched this TV show, I was so frustrated and just so disappointed by the overall outcome. I'm going to talk about the reasons why, and I'm going to talk about why I'm also qualified to talk about this topic. So, to give you guys a bit of a background, I hold a bachelor's degree in media communication and culture, and for my senior thesis, spent an entire year writing about representation of Indian culture in Western media. Like I said, this took me 1 year to write, and during this process of writing my senior thesis, I watched a bunch of movies and TV shows which had Indian characters but were made by Western media, and one of those shows was Never Have I Ever. So I was saying, I when I studied Never Have I Ever for my thesis, I was looking at it largely through a cultural lens more than a TV show to enjoy. So my approach to Never Have I Ever was from the beginning. It was very critical and analytical, and maybe that's why also I didn't enjoy it as much because I was expecting something out of it, but I didn't get what I wanted out of it. But to start off with the video, I'm just gonna introduce you to some basic background information on Never Have I Ever if you've never watched the TV show or you've only heard about it but don't know much about it or you've just forgotten about it. But Never Have I Ever is an American comedy drama television series that aired on Netflix from 2020 to 2023 with 4 seasons. It is created by Mindy Kaling and Lang Fisher, and it stars Maitri Ramakrishnan, Purna Jagannathan, Richa Murjani, Darren Barnett, and Jaren Lewison. It has more actors that play a big role in the show, but these five are I will say, the most important ones, especially in context to my video. And the story of Never Have I Ever, it centers around Devi, who's played by Maitri Ramakrishnan, and Devi Vishwa Kumar is a 15-year-old Indian American Tamil girl from Los Angeles. Her parents immigrated to America. They're first generation immigrants. When it just follows her like kind of like a teenage life, as a as an Indian American growing up in America, and it follows her life after her father passes away very suddenly in the middle of her orchestra showcase, and it takes us through for her 4 years of high school while she navigates a relationship between her rather strict and traditional mother, Nalini, who is played with Purna Jagannath, and um, also while she navigates relationships with boys who, meanwhile, to the midst of this, she's just trying to discover herself. So it's a very coming of age TV show. It's a very coming of age story. Um, it's a very teenage story. And while the TV show, a lot of people have praised the TV show, especially a lot of South Indians, people with Desi origins. They really did like the TV show because they felt their story was being represented. Also, while I do think it definitely portrays a large portion of Indian Americans, I feel like it doesn't portray all sort of Indian Americans or just all Indians who have grown up abroad. Before I talk about the criticisms that I had with the show, I kind of want to talk about the good parts. So, the good part about the show is that it incorporates the Indian culture in a very natural way that does not feel forced. And what I mean by that is a lot of times when you see an Indian character in Western media, their entire personality, their entire persona, their entire storyline is just based around Indian culture, but that feels very forced onto you. Everything they say, everything they do, everything their everything their characters made about is just about like either religion or that they're vegetarian or that their parents are strict and stuff like that. Just negative stereotypes over and over again. But in this show, it doesn't feel as forced. And an example of this is in episode 1 when Devi, in episode 1 season 1, when Devi is praying to gods for a good school year, And that scene just felt so natural to me because that's such an Indian thing to pray for good luck just before your first school year or every time you do something big. Events like attending Ganesh Puja, the introduction of aunties in episode 4, Indian aunties are always going to be famous, and just the incorporation of the entire arranged marriage trope. It just felt so natural and so authentic. It didn't feel forced. It felt like it was a natural part of the story. And what I loved about this show is that Devi is so much larger than just being an Indian. As I said earlier, a lot of times Indian characters they're very confined to their Indianness in Western media. But Devi is so much larger than just being an Indian. She's not just an Indian, she's also a very intelligent girl. She's a pretty girl, she has ambition, she has dreams. She's not just an Indian whose personality is confined to being, oh, she's just Indian. And as an NRI, an NRI means non-residential Indian. It As someone who's grown up abroad, that just that means so much to me because I am so much larger than my Indian culture. I have a personality of my own. Not everything I do relates to India or me being Indian. One more thing that I loved about the show was that it breaks away from assigning stereotypical roles to Indian characters, such as running an e-mart or owning a gas station. Those are very, very overused and over stereotyped jobs that are given to Indian characters. In this case, however, Devi's mother Nalini, she owns a clinic. Now, moving on to the first issue I had with the show was that like I mentioned earlier, the show has been praised for breaking stereotypes. But however, while it does break some common stereotypes that people have of Indians, it is only reinforcing other ones. And I want to start off by classifying that there are two types of stereotype. In my opinion, the way I see it, there are two types of stereotypes that exist about Indians. One is how Westerners see us, and other is how Indians see NRIs. You may have heard me mentioning NRIs before. If you haven't, then I probably cut that part out. But NRI stands for non-residential Indians. And non-residential Indians just typically refers to Indians who are living outside of India for a long period of time. We are Indians, our passport are Indian, our nationality is Indian, we just don't live in India. And there is a very large which people don't talk about at all, but I feel like there are a lot of stereotypes that Indians themselves categorize to NRIs. And I face stereotypes and just preperceptions from both sides, from people who are not Indians and from people who are Indians. And what I've noticed is while this show has broken stereotypes of how westernized the Indians, this show has definitely solidified how some stereotypes of how Indians see NRIs. And one such stereotype that people have of NRIs is that we don't speak our native language or that we're not in touch with Indian culture. And the show only solidified this by the lack of Tamil dialogue. I don't expect Devi to speak Tamil dialogue, but the fact that she's living in an Indian family with her mom, her cousin, and then eventually her grandmother that comes in season 2, it kind of makes no sense that they're all speaking in English. I know this is an American TV show, so you can't expect it to be in Tamil full time. But at the same time, the fact that there's literally minimum absolute zero Tamil dialogue is just it's kind of irritating, it's kind of annoying, it's unrealistic. Yeah, a lot of times kids who grow up outside of India, they don't speak their native tongue that well, but they can definitely understand it. And usually parents often speak their native tongue at home. So the fact that Devi's family didn't was just super unrealistic, and I feel like this just reinforced the stereotype that Indians have of NRIs. And another stereotype that in reinforced is that in a negative approach is arranged marriages. I absolutely hated the approach that the show took with arranged marriages, and I may be coming from a biased point of view because my parents were married through an arranged marriage. 90% of my relatives are married through an arranged marriage, and I feel like arranged marriages are often categorized as this very evil, backwards, and just really bad thing. But arranged marriages are not all that bad, especially they're not all that bad. It really comes down to experiences. There are quite a couple of quotes that they were talking to Kamla, Devi's cousin, that came out as very down backwards to me and just negative. And when they were talking about her arranged marriage, there were a couple of quotes such as a wife, it's great to have opinions, but sometimes he will just want to come home and watch cricket. Like, what the hell? As a wife, it's great to have opinions. That is some of the most misogynistic shit I've ever heard. You know, another stuff is you want to work until you have children. All sons, fingers crossed. Are you kidding me? This TV show was released in 2020, by the way, guys. I know India has its issues with sons and daughters and whatnot, but educated families, and especially a family living in America, an Indian American family, people saying stuff like that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. A modern TV show, people saying you want to work until you have children, all sons, fingers crossed, what the hell? And you're saying this dialogue was said in a room full of women. To me, I was like, what the hell were the writers thinking? Because that just ticked me off. Like, that is such a backward. Yeah, stuff like this existed in India long time ago, and it probably does in the very rural areas of India. It doesn't really happen anymore, not as much as it did back then. And even if it does, you shouldn't be putting this out on a very public platform. I feel like they could have used this chance to shift the conversation about arranged marriage in a more positive way and as a more neutralized way instead of the approach they took. You know, especially with Kamala, it really irritated me because Kamala has been given this wise and clever personality, and she could have been shown as a symbol of woman empowerment. She's studying at Caltech. She's super intelligent. She's the type of person everyone wants to be. She's the cousin that your mom tells you about and you don't want and you get irritated about, but she's the type of person you all want to be. And yet her entire storyline, her entire existence in the show had been reduced to the trope of arranged marriages. Every time Kamala came on screen, 90% of the time we were just talking about her marriage. Another thing about about the show, which I think was definitely well done, but at the same time it did irritate me, was the cultural dissonance Davy faces. Cultural dissonance is basically a phenomenon that occurs when individuals who belong to multiple cultures are faced with situations where they perceive conflicts between a set of rules from one culture to another. So, to summarize that, basically, cultural dissonance means that you're in a conflict with a culture's norms and views, and they clash with your own. Where you feel like you don't really belong in either cultures and you feel in between. And this is something that Devi very clearly goes through. We can see that she doesn't really feel as belonged in the Indian culture and she wants to be a part of the American culture, but there are times where she doesn't belong in the American culture. And we can see this very clearly in season 1, episode 4, where she shows disdain at wearing Indian clothes, and she called the Ganesh Puja event an Indian dancing event a lame fest. And you can clearly see that she's not very proud to be an Indian. She's not very proud of her culture. She doesn't care much about her culture. If she's going to a cultural event, it's because her mom's forcing her. So you can see that cultural dissonance. And oftentimes, what happens with people like us, like NRIs, or people who are going abroad, we push away our cultural identity in order to fit in with society and our peers. And this is something that happened with me as well when I was in high school. Especially, I felt so disconnected with Indian culture that because everyone around me was not Indian, and people were listening to K-pop, or they're watching K-dramas, or people watching American TV shows, and naturally that's what I watched and that's the music I listened to because no one around me was Indian. And I did feel very disconnected from Indian culture, and that's something I relate with Devi. But the thing is, most of the Indians I knew and I grew up with went through a similar thing, but after a point of time, we reconnected with our Indian culture. And as we grew up, we realized how deeply we feel with our Indian culture. And I feel like the show missed out on this. They could have, in the earlier seasons, shown Devi's culture dissonance, and as the seasons went by, they could have shown how she grew to love her culture. And I feel like that would have been such a good way to represent Indian culture and just represent growth and character development. And we can clearly see that because of her dissonance and her inability to connect with Indian culture, that Devi suffers through cultural shame. And she's constantly struggling to accept her Indian heritage. these feelings of Devi's are validated by dialogue such as, even though Devi is Indian, she didn't think of herself as Indian as these girls. So sometimes she felt out of place. Devi most likely understands her Tamil culture, but she refuses to associate it with it in a deep manner. Hence, it makes her feel more left out within her own peers, her own cultural identity. And again, like I said, this is something that a lot of NRIs do go through. It's just very natural consequence of growing up abroad in a non-Indian environment. But at the same time, I feel like they could have showed this in a positive way. Because of Devi's disdain of Indian culture in the shows, oftentimes it came out as if Indian culture is very backwards, or it's very, out of date, or it's not a place for women. And I felt like when I was watching the show that I was getting these messages out of the show. But these are not messages I feel like we should be putting out anymore, especially in such modern times. Personally for me, with Never Have I Ever, it's super confusing because while I was irritated by the entire show because forgetting her cultural identity, I did find Devi as a person to be annoying. I do think that the show itself, the Indian part of the show, was well done. The parts where they showed cultural dissonance and cultural shame, Devi struggling to accept her Indian heritage, was something that I have been through when I was younger. And I had gone through these feelings and emotions in my teenage years and my early uni life. But I also grew up eventually, or I learned how to embrace my cultural identity and how to like the Indian part of me. And I feel like the show missed out on a huge opportunity of showing this. With me, the biggest issue with Never Have I Ever is really the lack of growth in Devi. As a person and as someone with embracing her cultural identity, I just wish they could have shown more of that. They had such a golden opportunity of doing that. I know the show is based on Mindy Kaling, the one of the show's creators' own personal life, but I do feel like the show ends up, in a way, generalizing the entire experience of Indian American diaspora, and that's not very much true. I feel like a lot of NRIs, some NRIs definitely do have gone through similar experiences as Davies, but a lot of NRIs have not. And a lot of people are very much connected to the Indian culture. They're very proud of their Indian heritage, or maybe they weren't eventually. They weren't initially, and then they grew up to like their Indian culture. Another stereotype this show is that Devi's mother Nalini, the entire time when I was watching Never Have I Ever, I had a hard time just connecting to Devi. I just didn't feel like this was an accurate representation of Indian culture. I don't expect them to make Devi's experience identical to mine. Everyone's experience is different from others, but I do wish that Devi had more of a growth in the 4 seasons. Anyways, I guess my bottom line about Never Have I Ever is just that they had a very good chance to show a more accurate and more open representation about Indian culture and Indian heritage and people of Southeast Southeast Asian culture. But I feel like they just missed out on that by just showing negative stereotypes. It felt more like they were just showing these certain stereotypes as a cash grab or as something to feed to the Western media and be like, yeah, you guys were correct. Like they were pretty much appeasing the Western media, and that's what my take was on Never Have I Ever. It could have been something really good, but it wasn't, and it did not become good, and it missed out on a lot of stuff. Anyways, I tried to make this video as cohesive as possible, but it's a Monday night and I just came home from work and I had dinner and I decided to record this video, and I wrote down stuff on a laptop, but I ended up just rambling because my thoughts are all over the place and I'm really tired. So, thank you so much for listening till the end if you did, and I'll see you back in the next video, whenever that will be. Bye!